Whether you are a new or experienced leader, one of the areas that you absolutely positively must become skillful in is learning how to have difficult conversations at work. And it can feel really scary. It can be really uncomfortable, but it is definitely an area that leaders have to master, because it is said in one study I read that about 4 hours a week of leadership is actually dealing with conflict in and of itself. So with that being said, this is definitely an area we want to become skillful in, and we want to be able to master so that we can handle these types of conflicts and these types of difficult conversations with finesse, with a bit of class, and with, more importantly, of anything else, effectiveness that keeps these relationships intact at the workplace and even in our personal lives. Hi, if you don't know me, I am Barika from Simply Unique Coaching, and I have been leading for over 15 years. I led more than 18 teams. I got my first leadership position in 1997. And since then, I have been dealing with conflicts and having to help resolve them. And I've really developed a knack for doing it. It actually started in my first couple of positions that were more in customer service related positions, where I constantly had to deal with resolving problems for customers. And I felt like that really helped give me the foundation that I needed for leadership, because from that point in time, it has really helped me to have some very difficult conversations throughout the years with employees, but they have been effective conversations as well. So today's video, we're going to talk about, first of all, what can make these types of conversations hard? And then how do we prepare for these conversations? Also, what are some considerations we need to keep in mind during the conversation to ensure that it is an effective conversation? And also how to ensure that we can keep that relationship intact so that we are still able to work with the person, we're still able to go along and get along and be able to move forward as colleagues, as coworkers, as leader to team, and in whatever type of difficult conversation you're needing to have, whether it's with a boss, whether it's with a team member, whether it's with a customer or someone else in a different department. Being able to have those difficult conversations is really going to be able to help you to become more skillful and more polished and more professional as a leader and as an individual in the workplace. Okay, so one of the things that I learned is that every conversation that is difficult does not have the same degree of difficulty. Some are actually a little bit harder than others to have, but they all are necessary if you're finding that you're in a place where, if this particular situation continues, is going to lead to a long-term problem. That's definitely going to be an indication that you need to have that conversation. And here's for me how I can tell a leader, I can tell when someone has leadership capabilities, is that they're willing to say the things that other people are not willing to say, and hear what I'm saying and don't hear what I'm not saying. So I'm not saying they have to be harsh and they have to be mean and they have to be cruel. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is they're willing to have the conversation or to do the work to get through that difficulty and to get on the other side, that other people may want to tiptoe around and dance around, or may just want to ignore and push to the back. The leader is actually going to say, in order for us to get this mission accomplished, in order for us to get to this end desire, we have to complete this goal. And they're willing to do whatever it takes to overcome those difficulties and to have those conversations. So going back to it being different degrees of difficulty, maybe you have to talk to an employee about coming in late. That might not be too much of a difficult conversation. Maybe you just have to make the time. Sometimes finding the time can be difficult, right? But also, depending on that particular employee, maybe it's a difficult employee. Maybe it's someone who tends to have a reputation for being hard to get along with, or maybe combative when they're approached, or maybe they become defensive. And knowing how your employees respond to different situations is going to be important, because you're going to use that knowledge to help you develop the strategy on how you're going to approach them to have that tough conversation. Sometimes what can also make it difficult is the nature of the subjects. There was a couple of times where I had some individuals who were doing things that they should not have been doing, and having to have those conversations about those sticky situations, but they were absolutely necessary because they went against the code of conduct for those companies and those organizations. And it's like, hey, you broke the rules, and you broke the rules. Like, this is a clearly defined no contest rule. Like, this is absolutely not acceptable in any workplace at any time ever. Like, and having to have those conversations, because those were a little bit uncomfortable, because like, I'm seeing some stuff that I shouldn't be seeing and that you shouldn't be doing at work, and it can just be the subject matter as well. But also knowing that as a leader, you have to have and take on that responsibility of having those difficult conversations. Also, one of the things that I want to encourage you to do is to pay attention to your own emotions, because if it's been an ongoing issue, or maybe somebody that you have had a difficulty in the past getting along with, sometimes that person may know how to push your buttons, or sometimes there can be some things that can kind of trigger you. And you have to be aware of those things because you need to separate the next part of what I learned. You need to separate the person from the actual behavior or the problem, because seeing that person as a problem is going to make solving and resolving conflict so much harder. And so being able to say, okay, me and this individual need to work through this particular problem, but the individual is not the problem. This behavior is the problem, or this lack of action is the problem. And knowing that you need to address that. Like, don't say the person's lazy. This is an area where we need to increase the productivity of the individual, right? So we need to help them with the behavior. The behavior is not completing assignments. The behavior is not completing assignments to the capacity that they need to be able to do or that they're able to do. And being able to address that is the issue, not that the person is a quote unquote character or has this characteristic. Don't make that innate to them, because honestly, most people, when you're able to overcome these kind of situations, when you don't see them as that characteristic, it's going to help them change and to become what you actually see them as, because a good leader is actually able to cultivate that out of employees that are teachable. All employees are not teachable. All employees are not cooperative. And even sometimes they can be resistant. That's fine. And people get defensive. That's fine. That's just a human nature thing. Sometimes, when you get that feedback, it's like somebody just hit you, like pops you in the forehead. It's like, oh, I need a minute to process that. But reasonable people, when they take the time to evaluate the feedback and say, okay, is there something here that I can grow and become better with? Or maybe this is their first time hearing it and they're shocked. But then sometimes their family members have been telling them something, or maybe a coworker has told them something, and then them hearing it from you. Another time it's like, okay, no, something is actually up because different people are telling me the same thing. So it's a personality trait, and maybe not a personality trait, but a bad habit maybe that may have formed, and maybe that individual didn't know about it. So being able to have that conversation with them is going to help them to be a better person. But just make sure you pay attention to your emotions and don't, if a situation occurs and it happens and you feel like on the inside, you feel like, oh my gosh, like you can feel your temperature rising and yourself getting like a little squirrely on the inside, then maybe just table the conversation. Don't have it right then and there. Actually, we're going to talk about that next too. Where you have the conversation matters, how you have the conversation matters, and when you have the conversation matters. So you want to pay attention to the setting, because that is going to be a big, big, big deal. Sometimes you don't need to have the conversation right away, but you don't need to delay it. Like, you don't need to procrastinate, okay? That's absolutely the worst thing to do. Don't procrastinate. But it is important to determine, okay, when is the best time for me to have this conversation with this person? If they are a night owl, don't have the conversation with them first thing in the morning. You're probably not going to get the best version of them. And then even with some conversations, you may want to have them maybe towards the end of the week, because you want them to have a chance to process it over the weekend. Or maybe some conversation you need to have with them at the beginning of the week, so they have time to work through the situation and get feedback real time. Maybe on Monday we'll have the conversation, and then we monitor the particular action or whatever the item is throughout the week, and then just say, okay, this is where we're getting better, we're seeing some progress. And having that real-time feedback is really, really a great thing that really can help employees improve. So now let's talk about strategies for keeping the relationship intact, because I believe that when you really handle conflict the right way, the relationship is going to be intact afterwards. There's not going to be you see them walking down the hallway and they're like, we shouldn't be seeing that, right? So I think that it's going to be really important in order to know that, okay, we're having this conversation because I want you to be the best version of you that you can be. And in order for you to be the best version of yourself that you can be, then we need to address this particular item. And then I feel like this, if you're able to give feedback, you need to be able to receive feedback. So as a leader, be willing to both give and receive feedback. It should not just be a one-way all the time. So maybe like you give feedback to the employee and the employee says, well, I did it this way because you told me you wanted this, and that's what I thought you wanted. And then, you might need to take that feedback and say, oh, did I miscommunicate? Oh, was I unclear in my communication? And maybe, and you can say, you know what, let me give that some thought, and then I'll come back to you and make sure that we address that. Because if there's something I'm doing on my end, I want to make sure that I'm helping to support you as best as possible. Like, be humble. That's the best leadership skill I can tell you. One of the best ones is to be humble, because we're not perfect. And in your humility and in your humanity is going to allow your team to have a little bit more grace for you and you're going to be able to have grace for others. So one of the other factors that I think is important is to ensure that you are exactly clear on what the problem is. Don't just pull somebody to the side and have a conversation with them and you're not able to clearly communicate what the situation is, as well as examples of the situation. You need to be very, very clear on what the problem is that you want to address. And don't pick like 5, 10 problems in that conversation. Try to keep it to one, unless they're connected to like maybe 2, 3 max. 3 max. But like literally, I prefer to have one conversation about whatever the situation is at the time, unless, like I said, it's a ripple effect to some other things that are all coming together. So if it's like low performance, you're coming in late and then it's causing you to not be able to complete your work. And, so those are like how you can combine 2 together like that. But if it's like they're coming in late, but then they also cuss out somebody, in the workplace, which they shouldn't be doing. Those are 2 separate issues, and we're going to deal with the coming in late first, or whichever one is the most important. Probably the using profanity to whomever would be the first one I would address. And then we're going to address the coming in late, maybe in another meeting, if that's been a habit or something like that. But at any rate, we want to definitely have those concrete examples. So if I'm saying, hey, you're coming in late, I notice that you're coming in late, then I need to show a track record of the times that they came in late. If it's like, hey, they cussed out this employee. I mean, not the employee, but maybe a customer or something like that. Well, the customer complained to me and such and such and such. I got a complaint from this customer at this date at this time that this is what happened. And then also what I like to do is to get a perspective from the other person of what happened, because maybe they said something like, oh, shoot, and maybe the customer heard something different. And then it's like, okay, they may say, I didn't say a bad word. I said, shoot, like, oh man, I dropped my pen, or I dropped something like, oh, shoot, I spilled coffee on my shirt or something like that. And, the customer thought that they were talking to them, They might say, well, such and such was sitting right next to me, so they know what happened. And so from there, if it's a situation like that, I would say, okay, thank you for letting me know that. I said, let me just go ahead and talk to such and such, and then I'll get back with you in a little bit. So my goal from there is I'm going to go talk to such and such before they have a chance to talk to such and such, because I want to make sure that the story, I get as clean of a story as possible to help put the pieces together. Because then if I talk to Joe Schmo and Joe Schmo's like, oh, they didn't say anything bad to that customer, then I know, okay, the customer just misheard or just took it maybe the wrong way. And then I know not to basically bother the employee more with that. So then at that point, I would go back to that employee and say, hey, after I'd looked into things, I had a chance to talk to such. They said the same thing that you said. So don't worry about the customer complaint. We're not going to worry about that. I believe what you share with me is especially based off of what the other individual shared with me. So we're not going to worry about it, right? But if the other person says, well, they said that and some other things, then that's a different conversation you're going to have with that employee, right? So we always want to make sure that we know what is going on with the employee, and as well as we want to ensure that we are doing our best to help them and to resolve the conflict. And of course, with me, anybody who works with me knows that I expect them to be as honest as possible. I want them to be as honest as possible, and I'm going to deal with them a lot better and in a more professional manner. We're going to have a much, much more improved working relationship if they are a positive person who is telling me the truth. And in truth, we can definitely get things done and we can deal with what comes, right? Also, this is a really important point. Make sure that you're not blaming the other person. We don't want to be like, I'm thinking of like the mom on the beginning of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
They said you're moving with your auntie and uncle in Bel-Air.
But we don't want to point blame. Like that's like don't do that. Don't do that. It's unprofessional. And we can share like, this is what happened or this is what was reported to me, but don't blame the person for something. And I'm going to give an example in a little bit about something I had to definitely address with someone who was working under me. And it was very inappropriate what they did, but we'll talk about that in a second. So whenever we're having these conversations, we also want to ensure that we're paying attention to verbal and nonverbal cues from the other individual. If you see that they are starting to breathe heavily, their chest is rising up and down, it's like, okay, this person is, make a note to yourself, like, are they super, super upset? Or, for me, tears don't really, they don't move me unless it's like a family member died or a pet died or something like that, or, but for doing something wrong, they don't necessarily move me. Now, I do know that sometimes people may feel bad about not performing as well as they hope they have. And that's something, that's something different, but that the tears aren't going to move me. Seeing improvement is going to move me. I want to see the improvement in the other area, but I am going to be professional. I am going to be supportive of the employee, but I am going to be very, very, very extremely clear on what I'm expecting to see moving forward. Extremely clear. extremely. And throughout that conversation, I'm checking to see, okay, what is their perspective? How do they perceive the situation? Do they understand the concern that has been raised, whether it's by myself or by another individual? And then do they understand the ramifications of if they don't improve in this area? And do they understand what the positive consequences will be of them improving in the situation? And then also how we are going to measure success and what does success look like? So coming out of that conversation, what I'm looking for is us to have a mutual understanding and a mutually agreed upon solution, but regardless of whether they agree or not, because you might say, okay, well, the production is this and, you need to meet this, and maybe they don't agree with that, but like, this is what the standard is. It is what it is. Like, it's not going to change. We can maybe work on a development plan to help them get there. But it's been super rare that I've had somebody push back on that, anything like that. And most of the time, if I see any pushback, it's actually more in the comments of videos like these. And I know those people who do that, they don't even lead a team, because if they led a team, they definitely wouldn't have the responses that they put down. So I don't stress about that kind of stuff. So since you made it this far in this video, I'm going to share with you a time when I had to actually walk through a difficult conversation with someone. But what I want to know from you is, how do you feel about handling conflict at work? Is it super easy for you? Is it a little bit difficult? Is it very difficult? Let me know in the comments below. So here's the interesting thing about making these videos. It's like, I have tons of examples and things I can use, but however, for confidentiality purposes, I really don't use a lot of them. And just for professionalism, I really just don't use a lot of them, just because I just don't think that I want to share certain things over the World Wide Web, right? And I will share this one particular example of, I was working with an individual, and we did have a difficult person that was a part of our group. And this person would give people a run for their money. I've seen them maybe 2 years prior to working with someone else. And I guess I saw that person having to stay on top of them, because that person would just give them they could be very difficult and they could be super sneaky. But I ended up working with the individual on something that was a little bit more like a volunteer basis. So it was like more of a relaxed setting where it was kind of like more of a team building kind of thing. And so through that, I had a different relationship with that person. So when they ended up being in my group, maybe about 2 years later, they were just doing things that they really shouldn't have been doing at times. It was just, we just had to work with them. They weren't as bad with me as I've seen them be with other people, because I would call them out on their stuff. I was like, listen, we're not doing that here. We're not doing that here. And I would be frank with them when I needed to be frank with them. And it's like we had an understanding. It's like, okay, and super smart individual. But I had to stay on them, because I knew if they got an inch, they were going to take them out. They like to push boundaries and like to see what they could get away with. Then it's like, okay, we're not doing that here. We're not doing that with this group of individuals. We're just not doing it, right? And so the person who was working with me, something happened one day and they were together, and that individual looked at this person that was difficult and said, I don't like you. Or either they said, I don't like you, or I hate you, or something like that. And I was like, and I just happened to walk up on the conversation. I was like, whoa. So I didn't address it right then and there with the person who was working underneath me, because I didn't want to reprimand them directly right in front of the other individuals. However, I absolutely positively did have a conversation with them about it. And I was like, you can't say that to them. And then they went into defensive mode and they're like, I didn't say that. And I was like, yeah, you did. And they were like, I didn't say that. I was like, yeah, you did. Because then I noticed that they kept saying that they didn't say that they strongly disliked the person, right? The phrase that they used. And I'm like, even though it's a difficult person, like, you still can't say stuff like that. And that let me know that that's how they saw that person, versus seeing the behavior that they didn't like to see from the person. They lumped the behavior with the person, right? And you can't solve conflict like that. And that's why they were having a much harder time with them than I necessarily was. Because I'm like, okay, this person is smart. This person has some ways about them, but we couldn't, necessarily move them out of our group. They were assigned to us in our group, and we had to work with them. So it is what it is, right? At that point. So I'm like, no, you can't say that. So I kept talking to the individual who was working with me until they acknowledged. They're like, oh my gosh, I said that. I was like, yes, you did. And I was like, you cannot say that, and then we had a conversation about that. And in situations like that, I would go back to the other person and say, hey, I had a conversation with the other person. I heard what they said. And I had a conversation with them because they should not have said that. So I just want to let you know, because there are certain things, like I said, timing and place. Like, I'm not going to reprimand this person in front of, 20 individuals. Like, that's not the time and place. So I'm going to pull them to the side. We're going to have a conversation. And then I'm going to talk to the other party that was affected and let them know, hey, I saw, I heard, and I addressed it. So then now everyone knows, okay, this is not allowed. And also that individual, because something like that not being addressed, that individual would act out even more, because it just, when people who behave like that get more negative feedback, they can become a lot more difficult. In times when they don't deserve that kind of treatment or feedback, then definitely speak up for them, and say, hey, I saw that wasn't okay. Because then it also trains them, like, even though they were not their best at that moment, that they still deserve a level of respect and dignity because they are a human being. Now, if you want to learn more about dealing with difficult customers, I want you to watch this video next. And with that being said, make it a great day. I hope that you have an amazing day and do great things in this world. Take care.